That's funny because I was just like, yeah. Anyways, welcome back. How's it going today?
Good. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Happy to be firing up some weed and talking more Illinois cannabis with you. It's always a good time. So
Were you in Springfield today?
no,
Was
no.
that just an old picture I saw on social media?
Yeah, recently went to Springfield here. I'll have to pull that up. And
I was to say I went there like at the start of the pandemic. I like took like a weekend trip there with a friend. And actually had like a great time.
yeah, it was really fun. So I went to the Abraham Lincoln Museum, which I'm realizing is somewhere else on social media. I was going to post some funny pictures that I took or share some funny pictures that I took. But yeah, recently went to Springfield and had a really good time going to the Abraham Lincoln Museum and
The
everything
Lincoln
else.
Museum. You can get some good corn dogs at Cozy Dog.
Yeah, here's a picture for the folks that are watching right now. I was in Abraham Lincoln's house getting 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 baked.
And that
If
museum is cool. It's worth a day trip.
Yeah, if you've not been to the Abraham Lincoln Museum, folks, it is awesome. It's in Springfield, and it's a really good time. So, and if you're not watching the video version of the podcast, that's chillinois.net/video. Um, it's great that we've got the video podcast now because I wanted to share some things that have come across this desk of mine. And my desk isn't very impressive, by the way. I'm literally, it's funny. Whenever I do these interviews, I'm just using like this like makeshift card table. That's why if I like ever touch the desk, you see I'm like shaking right now. Anyways, um, so this recently came across my desk, some bills that we've been talking about, the Illinois Cure Act, several cannabis bills. There's going to be a public hearing on the 1st. Today's the 26th, by the way. The hearing's at 10 a.m. It's in Springfield, Illinois. Speaking of Springfield, Illinois, I think I might be cool to return for something like this. And if not, I at least plan to form some witness slips or submit some witness slips. So that's something that I wanted to talk about today. But yeah, what do you think about this?
What are the craft grow bills there?
HB 25. I wonder if I can see. Hmm. I'd have to look it up on the
I imagine one is like the canopy size increase.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I'll have to take a look
I was
really
just
quick.
curious what
But
the other one would be.
but it's just here's my thought while I look that up. Hold on a second here. While I look that up, my thought is like, it's great we're talking about it now so people know about it, but I really wish more like, and I know this happens all the time. I know this is nothing new, but like I wish like there was a little bit more of a public awareness campaign, like, hey, this is going on, bring your feedback, stuff like that. But
Oh, that
like,
these laws are like out there, like that these bills are out there being proposed.
right. Well, and then there's these committee, like the public is allowed to go to these things, like, and they should, you know. But the
Well,
fact, like, and I'm
they're
not
in
saying
Springfield though, right?
they are, yeah,
Yeah.
they are. But and I guess I'm, like I'm making a point that is admittedly a little bit weak because basically what I'm saying is like, why don't they announce these things? And I'm literally sharing my screen where the
Well,
announcement is,
right.
right?
Yeah.
So, but I'm just saying, like, you'd think that on behalf of there's a lot of elected representatives that claim to be like the person for the cannabis community, right? You'd think like those types of people would be like, hey, cannabis community.
They don't really, yeah, they don't seem to really engage
Hmm.
in that way about, I don't know if it's really like, because I mean, are they really looking for like popular support for these things, or is it just more about like maneuvering and negotiating like in the, Congress?
Right, right. Let's
Like it's
see.
such a low priority, like how many people are actually going to be calling people about cannabis stuff.
Hmm. So House Bill 31. Okay, House Bill 25. This is how you look this stuff up, folks. If you're watching the video version, by the way, go to ilga.gov, and it's a little bit of a archaic Craigslist-esque looking website. So this is the first one that looks like this has to do with licenses. It raises the maximum number of craft licenses for specified craft growers, which I don't know exactly what that means, to 3 rather than 1, 6 rather than
Raises.
2, 10 rather than 3. And it also removes language prohibiting craft growers from being located within 1,500 feet of each other. There's a lot of these bills that seem to like slightly touch on the same things. It's like I don't know about you, what you think about this, but like I feel like it's like, hey, if this doesn't work out, maybe we go to this one type of thing. Um, I don't know. I'm new to this, so I'm just trying to share what I learn. But
Well, and this is like the start of a new, because like every 2 years they have like a different house. So
true. Yeah.
these like things being proposed now are like the start of the things that they will eventually become. So like, some of these things might be combined and edited, I would assume.
Hmm.
That's like, what was it you were saying? Like Evan Bruno said there was like something he was proposing, and he was like proposing a more conservative version and like an ideal version,
Yeah.
so it's kind of like that.
Yeah. So from what just for folks that are listening and maybe wondering, like it sounds like Evan was involved in drafting the language for the bill that we talked about in episode. I'll get that number in just a moment. It's with Evan Bruno. You should check it out. It's going to be available everywhere soon. But right now it's at chillinois.net/Patreon. We talked about a bill that he helped to draft language for, which removes the odor proof language from the vehicle code of Illinois. Now, I asked him about another bill, and it removes like basically everything to do with odor. It says like the smell of raw cannabis is not reason for search. The smell of burnt cannabis is not. That's the way I got the impression I got. And I asked him about that, and he basically said that, yeah, his would seem like it would have a better chance of passing given the attitudes of law enforcement of Illinois. And if you're curious about the attitudes of law enforcement of Illinois, that's a great episode to check out because he talks about their attitudes, right? And how they.
Well, it's interesting though too, because I sent you that video the other day of that cop who I assume is from like East St. Louis,
Mm-hmm.
so like the Illinois side of the St. Louis area. But he was saying that, in their area they operate under the idea that this even the smell of burnt weed in the car is not probable cause for a search.
Yeah, that was so interesting to hear. I
It
was going
might
to
it
try.
might be for like if they think it's the driver and you
Mm-hmm.
seem like you're like impaired. I mean, I'm sure they would use that as probable cause then, like if you smelled alcohol coming out of a car and someone seemed impaired.
Right.
But yeah, like just the idea that the smell of burnt weed wouldn't be a reason to like pull everyone out of the car and search them.
Yeah, exactly. I was about to pull that video up. But that's was a strange thing to see come out because typically like what you and I have seen, especially post legalization, was that cops seemed to be misinforming people, right? They were like saying things that weren't even in the language.
Well, but that they wrote the law in Illinois so that smell would still be probable cause. That's why
Hmm.
it said odor proof container. So then when you had a court, I mean, I think weren't there like two different court decisions that said about smell? Like one was for raw and one was for burnt, maybe something like
Yeah, I
that.
think
But
so.
I didn't think like cops would just be honoring that.
Right.
I thought they'd still be trying to like, ruin your life and make you figure that out later how to fight that.
Yeah. Um, well, I was about to share that video, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna throw it into the podcast description because I don't want to get too far off you know topic here. But so folks, if you want to see the video we're talking about with regard to a police officer saying, they don't search for those reasons anyways in that county, um
Yeah, like pay
check it out.
attention
It's
to
very
where that
interesting.
is because it's definitely not true for the whole of Illinois.
Right. So I was just about to look at this other bill. I'll share my screen again. Once again, folks, if you're not watching, it's chillinois.net/video. Oh, this one, I believe, yeah, requires the Department of Ag to issue an additional licenses, right? Because I believe we've hit the statutory limit for most licenses. Well, I think there might be one more lottery for either dispensaries or craft grow or both, but after that, it's done, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, is this to increase the number or just to like make them release them?
uh, it says issue. That's a good question. I guess I shouldn't weigh
Because
it because
remember
I.
before they did that whole thing where it was like they, like LaShawn Ford got that law through to like increase to have like another 110 licenses released, but it wasn't like an increase in the license. The 500 cap was still there. It was just like mandating their, sooner release or a new timetable for them or
Okay.
something.
Yeah, so that is possible. That is possible. Definitely, folks. I mean, well, this is the thing. Check it out here, and this is the other place you can see it, folks. There's this is going to be on the hearing on March 1st. And so I don't know exactly how these work. I don't
Is
get the
that stuff
sense.
virtual?
I don't know.
Like, do they have it online? I don't.
It doesn't seem like it does. Um, you can file, and this is the point I wanted to make today, is that if you can't make it today, you can file witness slips for or against. Now, personally, I will say I'm not against like specifically any of these laws, but what I will say is the issue I have with all of these laws that are cannabis related, that they do, my issue is they don't address any of what I feel are the substantive issues with the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. Like, this is addressing issues with regard to licensees, and that's okay. I'm not saying that we can't do that. I'm just saying, because of the spirit of what this was supposed to be about, you would think that priority number one would be making sure that people don't continue to go to jail for cannabis, or at least deal with it at all in a criminal context.
Well, and I think like we were going to talk about that article about that working group that they have in the
Mm-hmm.
house that they're putting
Got
together.
that pulled
I
up,
think if
actually.
if you like read through that article, you can kind of see where like their head is at in Springfield. Like it isn't really about
Give us, I
it's
want
not
to hear
really
your
about
take
like,
on this. I've got the article
well,
pulled up.
I just feel like it like just read through it.
Sure. Illinois House Democrats announced the formation of a cannabis working group Thursday that will aim to steer the burgeoning industry's expansion in a business-friendly way while still satisfying the equity goals of the landmark 2019 legalization law. There it is, I
Now
think, for
just
me.
that there, like what were the equity goals of the original law? Was it to establish a diverse regulated market, or was it to stop disproportionately arresting people for cannabis crimes?
That's a really good question. And I'm
Because
just
one
going
of
to,
those we're not pursuing further progress on.
yeah.
So it's great to try to diversify this like bullshit oligopoly we have here, but you know, like real social equity is not arresting people 9 or 10 times more for cannabis because they're minorities,
Right.
you know.
I'd say real social equity is allowing law enforcement to focus on violent and property crimes, you know?
Right.
And by the way, that's language, the first sentence from the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. Um, they said in
And
the
I mean, I saw like a tweet. It was some reporter. I don't know where I found this, but I was just Googling like or searching Twitter like Illinois cannabis and things, and it was like this federal judge in court, some guy was being called up, and it was like, oh, blah blah blah, a cannabis offense, and he was like, another cannabis offense. He's like, got a lot of these today. So it's like they're still like clogging up the system,
and
just
so
with
check
like,
this out. This is fun. This is what I think this is maybe what you thought I would step on, a little landmine here. The working group's main priority, according to LaShawn Ford, is to make sure individuals who have invested in the newly created industry are successful. Got to make sure that, they succeed, right? A part of that is to address the disproportionate impact the war on drugs had on communities of color, particularly when it comes to cannabis-related arrests. Hey, here's an idea. Maybe we stop cannabis-related arrests.
Well, and the state has really like, I don't know, man. It's weird because the state has put themselves in such a weird position to have made to have made this idea of this like you're going to have a bunch of this. I don't know how to say this. It's like you pitch that people should get into this industry because you want to diversify it and like make them give them generational wealth. Like the state is telling you, apply for these cannabis licenses. We're going to have these businesses be generational wealth for you. But like to have a good market, you have to have it be competitive and run a lot of those people out of business and have them lose their money. So like they're like, I see what he's saying, like because you've told people to like get you like, hey, we want to repair the harm, give people new opportunities, give them generational wealth. But yeah, it's like at the same time now you're like the way to do that then is to just bend over backwards and give them everything they want. And it's just like a weird position to be in, it seems.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it would have been like if the license caps weren't there and it was just like some kind of like real financial help and you're just putting people out there with this financial help so they're less on the hook if they do go out of business, like that would probably be like a better
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of a better approach and your hands would maybe seem a little cleaner, like you're not trying to stack the deck in favor of whoever got lucky enough to win those lotteries.
Right. Yeah, I can't get past the fact that the cycle that we're complaining about, the cycle that we're trying to give people a leg up on, we're refusing to stop that cycle.
Well, and I love when they cite this number all the time about the expungements.
Yeah.
It's not like no one that was arrested in Illinois for selling a bunch of weed is gonna get a license because they still have a charge on their record, most likely, and might still be in jail. Like
Right.
those things weren't up for expungement anyway. So
Yeah,
like the
and
only thing
actually,
these expungements are just for like those low level, less than an ounce. Like you
right.
could petition, I think, if it was more than that, but there was no guarantee you were going to get it.
So in short, what you just said is basically the folks that, held the legacy market. We always talk about the legacy market and everybody talks about how great it is. And I agree with that. But the way that you just described that and the way that it all worked out meant that those folks were prevented from participating in this at all. It's crazy.
Well, it's interesting too, because from like a government point of view, like, do you really want those people in the
But
market?
that's, they're kind of, I don't know
Because
about you,
they
but
were criminals, right?
right. But do you recall, am I just wrong? Was this anecdotal for me? But like, I swear to God that part of the legalization pitch, and maybe it was just one of the people in my smoke circle that pitched this. Maybe it wasn't somebody in the state, but I swear that when the first idea of social equity came around, it was the idea that your plug was going to have like the option to get a license. Like, and it wasn't exactly like that. It's not like just any plug. It was still like in the idea of social equity, but like, I don't know, you know, like
Well, I think even just like, yeah.
did you
Well, it's
have
like
that
because
experience though?
well, from I don't know if I had that experience, but that would have been my interpretation just from the way they talked about it.
Right.
Like
That's what I'm saying.
the like repairing the harm of the war on drugs, like giving people new opportunities. It's, like, yeah, I guess my interpretation, yeah, would have been like, oh, well, someone who would have gotten in trouble as a legacy operator would have the opportunity to get into this market.
Hmm.
But I think if you have a felony, like you couldn't get a license, right?
Right. Right. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, where it's like they specifically were prevented from participating in the market. So it's
Well,
like,
and you had to be a veteran too.
right, right. So yeah, I mean, over 30 cannabis bills, as this article is saying, which by the way, we'll put it in the show notes as well if you'd like to read it for yourself. Over 30 cannabis related bills have already been filed in the current General Assembly, which began in January. And it only, well, okay. Yeah, I think I do recall a bill that touches on expungement, but that's like the only thing. Like there are very few things that aren't, let me put it this way. There are very few things that aren't industry related proposals. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah,
They're
yeah, I
not
mean,
like
look,
consumer centered.
yeah, and if we keep reading, they'll talk about the Cannabis Business Association.
Oh, lovely. Which by the way, we just dropped an interview with Portia Mittens, who's on the Cannabis Business Association of Illinois. Um, Yeah. So one of the involved organizations is the Cannabis Business Association of Illinois, a statewide trade association for cannabis businesses. The association's legislative priorities include re-implementing curbside pickup and drive-through services after pandemic-era measures expired, decoupling Illinois cannabis tax code from the federal tax code, what some people know as 280E, I believe, and extending the right to work in the medical cannabis industry for those who have previous cannabis related convictions. Okay.
That's
Uh,
one, yeah, I've heard because apparently you can't work in a medical dispensary if you're a felon.
yeah.
So like, they're going to change it so it'd be like the same between the two because you can work in a rec dispensary, I guess.
Interesting. Yeah, that's what Pamela Altoff is saying. Currently, the recreational statute allows individuals with previous drug convictions to gain access to the cannabis industry. That is prohibited in the compassionate and medical statute. We'd like to see them both mirrored. I think that makes sense, I suppose. Um, Cannabis Equity Illinois Coalition has their own priorities, including expanding support for the craft grow industry, creating a singular cannabis oversight commission to streamline cannabis programs, and creating licenses for clubs and lounges so people other than homeowners are able to legally consume cannabis. That one's a neat one. I've heard it. That popped up, I think, in the last legislative session and didn't really go anywhere. I guess that'll be cool. Before I ask my question, do you got any thoughts on anything that was just mentioned?
Go up
Sure.
just one more. Yeah.
Oh, these ones. Yeah.
They'll work with other lawmakers, state agencies. Yeah, it's just interesting because like nowhere in this like it's not like an expansive article, but there's just no talk of patients or consumers.
Mm,
I mean, there's a
yeah.
little bit like medical reciprocity for other states, great for, you know, all those Missourians that are dying to buy medical cannabis in Illinois now.
Yeah. And I mean,
Um,
this article mentions that Cannabis Business Association of Illinois is involved. Not only are they involved, but I think you found, well, we've already
well, I
detailed that.
immediately just recognize these names from talking about who the Cannabis Business Association has contributed to just themselves. So it's like Bob Morgan, obviously, Sonia Harper's taken money from them, Bob Reed has taken money from them, Barbara Hernandez has taken money from them, Marcus Evans has taken money from them, LaShawn Ford has taken money from them. The only one I couldn't find was this Jennifer Gong Gershowitz.
Mm,
And then
gotcha.
like, they also like just briefly looking earlier today, like Barbara Hernandez has taken money from PharmaCann and Verano, you know, and obviously we've looked at LaShawn Ford, and I think Bob Rita has taken like contributions from individual companies too. So it's like
Yeah.
it's a group that's, you know, funded by cannabis companies
Right. And just for folks that
working
are
with a cannabis business association to help us craft cannabis policy for Illinois.
curious and want to learn more about everything you just mentioned, check out episode number 232 of the podcast. I think that's a good spot. And if you're watching the video version, you may have seen me hold up this document. This is the latest revision, Philip. It's sitting at 48 pages. We're almost up to the modern day. So, folks, if you want to see citations and if you want to see how you can trace the money that we're talking about, check out episode 232. Philip will show you how to do that in that episode. Whoops, I didn't mean to end my screen share here. I wanted to ask you, thank you for pointing that out. That is a brilliant point. There's not one mention of, consumers or patients being really consulted.
Well, it's just funny because they have that medical cannabis working group that like I've joined for a couple times. I know you've been on it a bunch. Um, like why isn't that part of this?
Right. Well, and I mean, my question is the Singular Cannabis Oversight Commission. We were talking about before we got on air, like what is it? One plant, one agency. Like I've always thought that sounds nice. And you said that I think on quote before the show. It sounds nice. It's a catchy slogan. But then we were talking about like, what does that actually mean?
Well, and they had the criteria. We were sharing that, weren't we? About what they were like going to propose or what they potentially were thinking about proposing as like qualifications to like sit on
I can't
like
remember.
that panel
I can't
or
remember.
that agency.
Yeah, that specifically I can't remember, but I'd love to dig back into that. Did we just like pull up the law or something like that?
I can't remember now.
It's all good. We smoke too much weed. My question though is like, what really does this change? So they say from having 13 plus state agencies who are not talking to each other. Like, why the fuck aren't they talking to each other? That's the first question. I can call like I talked to you. That's how we set this up, right? Like I don't know. Like
Well, wasn't part of it that you talked about with like that guy David Lakeman that like they didn't really get money? Like weren't they kind of like, they're all included in this new industry, but it's like they didn't have like extra funding and like
yeah, I think I
staff.
recall something like that. Yeah, they've got a small staff and such. Yeah.
So it's just, yeah, it's like they were kind of saddled with extra work and just kind of like given the same resources.
Right. But
Yeah, you
to say that they're not talking to each other, it's like, all right, let's figure that out. I don't know, like you know what I mean? Like I don't
well,
know
and
why
that
we have to draft new
it probably takes
legislation.
time, right? Like
Sure.
you got to figure out how to work with other people in this new thing.
Well, and that's
But yeah, I always imagined that like that would be a hard, well, I guess no, because maybe they'd want to give it up. If it's more work and they weren't given more resources, maybe they'd be like, yeah, let's have a new agency that takes this.
well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It
But
just
if it was a boon to them, like if they were getting more funding because they were like on cannabis now, like I could also see that being like something they wouldn't want to give up, you know?
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's where I guess I could see it being a thing where it's like if they need more money, if they need more people and statutorily they just don't have that, I guess then maybe this can address it. Just to me, it sounds like maybe I'm oversimplifying things. I don't work there. I don't know what the fuck's going on.
Well, it's
Um,
funny too, like who regulates hemp in the state? Is that just the Department of Agriculture?
I got the sense that it was. I mean, he literally told me, he's like, Cole, if you submit a hemp application, if you would have this morning, you would have been walking out with it this afternoon, you know?
Well, you just wonder because it's like, it's the same plant and hemp is fit enough just to be regulated by the Department of Ag, but
And they
we're going
figured it
to have
out.
this whole new cannabis commission.
Yeah. They figured out hemp, which arguably, at least for a while, probably had higher demand. There was that whole bubble with the federal farm bill. I'm sure everybody, like, for a
Hmm.
while was just, yeah, give me a hemp license. And they figured that out. They figured out how to work with that, made it
Well, it's
simple.
funny too, because aren't there like numerous people who in this state are growing like THCA flower that abides by the farm bill that is like technically hemp?
Supposedly. That
No,
yeah,
I mean we know they are.
right.
There's like a bunch of companies doing it. And I know there's like I've heard of head shops that just
Sure.
openly are selling THCA flower, which, that is from my understanding, that is a valid loophole.
Mm-hmm.
At
Yeah.
least they're allowing it to stand that way in Illinois. But it's funny too, because you look at a lot of like you'll see like testing at dispensaries, and like a lot of that flower would abide by the farm bill too.
Right. And that's where I'm like, that's when I said it supposedly. It's not like I was like doing the whole allegedly, we allegedly did that. No, I just didn't really understand. Like I've seen places, like you say, head shops doing that. They oftentimes feel like dispensaries. But I just have never known how they're getting away with that. Yeah, how they do that. I don't get it
Well,
totally.
I think it is just that farm bill loophole. The same thing with like Delta 8.
Oh,
Like
so it's THCA, it's not Delta 9.
it's not
Gotcha.
Delta 9 THC, it's Delta
Okay.
9 THCA.
Yeah, took me a second there. Interesting. Hmm.
And as long as it's under like 3% or whatever, because that's how like what's that company like Shitiva, is that what they're called?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
That's like how that's what they're doing,
Hmm.
you know. And I've heard of other companies doing that too. It's funny that that didn't just become everyone's just like fuck this licensing thing. We're
Right.
just gonna sell THCA flower.
Yeah. Makes you wonder, like, why not? You know? But well, really quick, just to wrap up this particular topic, folks, if you want to submit a witness slip, we'll put the link for this House Executive Committee hearing in the podcast description. And basically, what you do is just paste in that link in there now, because if I get high, I forget. You look at each bill, right? And then you can click create witness slip. This is a good thing to know, folks. Um, and then you just fill out the form. I mean, the most important thing is that you fill out if you're a proponent or opponent, or I mean, yeah, if you don't have a position based on some merit, you can make a statement. You can also select to give oral testimony, it looks like, or you can just record a record of appearance. So if you'd like to
I feel
have
like
your
I feel like I watched something with like don't be too expansive in your writing, because I feel like I watched something with Kelly Cassidy once where she was explaining how they see these.
Mhm.
Do you ever hear her talk about that?
No, please share.
It's like during the process when they're like working on the law. I don't know at what point. At some point they like present the witness slips, and it's like, okay, this many were in favor, this many were against. And that's pretty much like the extent of to my understanding.
Gotcha.
So
Well,
it's good to know and good to do, but you know,
mhm.
don't spend too long working on your opinion thinking anyone's reading it.
Yeah, yeah. And if you have real thoughts and you have the time, I encourage you to go there and give the oral testimony, since
Oh, if you
that's an
could do
option.
that, yeah.
Yeah, if you can do that. But yeah, so wanted to share that that's coming up, and that's a way for you to signal some sort of support for or against several different things that we've tried to talk about, including the Cure Act, and several different Illinois cannabis bills. And like Phil said, just keep in mind that it sounds like they only show for or against. And also keep in mind, folks, I'm going to share this again. The agenda, it's not like they're just getting together to talk pot. Okay. We're not in a circle singing kumbaya. There's aging tech, which is probably agricultural tech, animals tech, business tech, 10 motherfucking pages, 1,369 entries, a whole bunch of shit. So I'm just saying,
Also
cannabis.
contacting their offices or trying to somehow, you know, talk to them in person even is always still the best way to get your voice heard, I would think.
Absolutely. And it's like very simple to do, folks. You can just literally Google your representative's name and contact them, and they have people that will field your inquiry. So, my representative sometimes just answers the phone if I call him at the right time of day. So it's very interesting. But what else? Okay, so there's that. We'll throw different links. I'll try to throw as many links that we referenced during that conversation in the podcast description. Um, really quick, what else did I have on the docket here? I know we talked about the new committee. We talked about the fact that most of them have received industry money, so it makes sense that all they're going to be talking about is industry-centered proposals. We talked about the hearings. Hey, just want to remind folks that you can leave us a voicemail, you can send us a text, and we can play it on the show. Or if you're just tipping us off to a very interesting news story or just a news story, it doesn't have to be very interesting. We can honor anonymity. So the number is 312-772-6844. Once again, you can submit tips, tricks, whatever. You can leave us a voicemail. Once again, it's 312-772-6844. I've actually got one voicemail to play here in a moment, but before we do that, was there any other news that you've recently seen that caught your eye before we close tonight?
There's always cannabis news.
What's some things that have made you go,
I
what?
don't, let me see what I shared cannabis news wise lately.
Sure. Yeah. I guess a quick congratulations to Illinois News Joint for winning the Bud Tender Influencer of the Year thing. I bring that up because we were nominated thanks to the Bud Tenders, I guess, that nominated us. We really appreciate that, and congratulations to Illinois News Joint. We ultimately backed out, but I appreciate if there are any bud tenders that are listening, and there must be, because according to the person that organized this, bud tenders had to have nominated us. So thank you. And bud tenders, do what you can to spread the good word about shit like this that we're talking about, so that your jobs are easier and you have more options, right? It's like a few shops in town. You could have a lot. You could have way more options than that. So, you find anything that
I don't think I did see anything.
well,
Just that MedMen's looking to get out of Illinois.
Medman is looking to get out of
I
Illinois.
forgot they were
I
still
was gonna
like a
say
company.
I didn't even know. You know, it's funny. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going out on a limb here. They were really like roasted by South Park back in the day for opposing home grow. Am I wrong?
I think I remember that.
Let me Google that.
Um, it's funny because in from my memory, they really like started that whole um dispensary as Apple Store concept type of thing, like product display cases and ordering off an iPad. At least that's like from my memory, that was like MedMen was really like pushing that type of thing back when they started. It's like their innovative approach to things. So it's just funny to me how many people, how many of these companies like copied that model, and the originators of it are just failing completely.
Yeah. So this is a 3-year-old article. I was remembering correctly. South Park did take a hit, haha, pun intended,
Oh yeah, it was
at
the
the
Tegrity Farms episode. Yeah.
at the marijuana dispensary chain MedMen in an episode that aired on a Wednesday 3 years ago. So the owner, Randy Marsh, investigates and finds that former customers are increasingly cultivating their own marijuana. When you grow your own pot, you're taking weed out of my children's mouths, he says. What happened to our country? People are being wronged by a broken system, and we must say no more. No more homegrown marijuana. As the son of a proud American farmer, I am concerned about what homegrown can lead to. Somebody's going to take these comments that I'm making out of context, and they're going to be like,
This is like, isn't this literally what Curaleaf said back in the day in New York?
it is. Yeah. People can
People
grow.
can grow weed wrong and poison themselves.
This is almost literally what they said to me in a statement on Reddit, or somebody who claimed to be them. Um, people can grow weed wrong and poison themselves. Unscrupulous growers could use cheap irrigation and drown babies. The fact is simple: marijuana must be grown with integrity. So it's a funny one. Anyways, Good stuff there. Good stuff. Well, why don't we close it out with a voicemail from a listener? And once again, you can do this, or if you don't want your voicemail played, that's also an option. Make sure to mention that. 312-772-6844 is the number. Here it is.
Yes, I haven't been a medical marijuana patient for 5 years here in Illinois, and I've overcome 6 addictions. If it wasn't for God and the plant that He put on this earth, I wouldn't be here. I'm 52 years old. I've overcome 6 addictions, and I'm going back to school to get my bachelor's in horticulture and cannabis industry operations certificate at the end of in May, and hopefully go on to build a cannabis cultivation center for women and to rebuild St. Clair County, Illinois. It's not Chicago, but if you ask me, St. Clair County, Illinois is the next worst thing next to Chicago. And that's all. Thanks.
Okay.
I'm so glad I found your podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for that message. It's really cool to hear that you've overcome addictions and that you're going back to school to get your bachelor's degree. Keep up the good work. I also saw that you left another message. I won't play it on air because you had some personal information, but you mentioned wanting to help. Definitely let me know what ideas you have. Always looking for some help. Super busy, honestly, but if we can make it work, we can make it work. So cool. Well, Philip, thank you for joining me. I'm really excited to see what happens with the future. It's always interesting. There's definitely never a lack of there's always something to talk about. How about that? You mentioned that earlier. There's always something new to talk about. So
Well, and I think like this year, like I don't think the Illinois and cannabis is going to be so stagnant as it's been the last like 3 years, you know? Like I think like society has opened back up, licenses are out, like money is tight, so it's hard for these people to get started, but like shit'll get moving eventually.
yep.
It's just like it can't be any slower than it's been the last 3 years. Like even legislatively, it's like what have they done? Like 1 or 2 laws changing things,
Mm-hmm.
just kind of about releasing licenses and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. Well, and to your
Like
point, it's been
even if this working group is like, you know, not like, it's just business people, they're all funded by the Cannabis Business Association, and they're working with the Cannabis Business Association on policy. Like at least someone is working on policy.
yeah.
you know, more than just like the same 3 names you hear all the time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And to your point about it being 3 years, for folks that haven't seen those other episodes, like it's been 3 years and what is it? There's 3 dispensaries open and 1 craft grow operating. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, and
Roughly.
not even 3 years. It's been like 10 years of medical practically.
True. But I mean,
So
with 3 years since the CRTA, which created these social equity licenses that
yeah,
Illinois keeps saying they're so successful and they've got the most
think
diverse.
I think there's like 7 or 8 dispensaries open now.
Okay. Nice.
I was
Nice.
actually interested. I thought it was funny because that Grasshopper Club, I think is what it's called,
Mm-hmm.
opened in Logan Square here in Chicago. And it's a black owned dispensary. And the guy like made it a point to be like, and we're not linked up with any of these MSOs or any of these like existing companies. Just like, because obviously like what is it? Ivy Hall was like the first black owned dispensary, I think, to open.
Uh-huh.
So it was just interesting because it kind of seemed like a very like
Well,
direct jab at that.
please explain that, Jeff, just for folks that haven't seen it. So
Well, I
Ivy
think just
Hall.
certain licensees have teamed up with existing operators or seem to have worked with or come from like a Cresco or something like that, you know?
Yeah. So in the
So,
case of Ivy
so that
Hall,
Grasshopper Club is like independent, you know?
right, right. And in the case of Ivy Hall, is it what one is it again? I can't remember.
Well, I think didn't we find that like the guy was like in the ownership of one of the Cresco dispensaries or like owned a like he
I
was a
think
licensee at one point previously?
possibly. Man, I'm glad we're writing all this shit down because
That like it was like Phoenix Farms or something like that. I don't know. I
yeah,
don't want to talk about it too much now because we're not certain on it, obviously.
sure. Sure, exactly. Let's not speculate too much. We'll have to return to it when
But
we'll
he
definitely return to
has
it. And
ties to an existing operator or an MSO,
right.
you
And
know,
then
and
there's
like
the
there's a
other
bunch of people who are like teamed up with Dispensary 33, you know, there's like 20 of them or something like that.
mhm. Then you've got the Green Rose with like ties to former law enforcement, and I believe Verano. Is that the Green
Oh,
Rose?
I mean, yeah, you have like OK Cannabis, which is owned by a former Chicago alderman and the COO for Chicago Public Schools.
Yeah. And by the way, just because we're on air and I know that we didn't talk about this beforehand, so if if you don't want to, it's fine. But just if you could, somebody has when we've talked about this before, somebody has said, "Hey, but this guy has done great things." The alderman you were just talking about. Can you just take on like they basically said like we were just pointing out that it's interesting that a politically
Well, I
connected
would just say
person gets this.
now, well, I would just say now, you know, again, ownership stuff is confidential. So we're taking the owner of Grasshopper Club's, just taking him at his word that he's independently owned and doesn't have ties to these companies. But now
Mhm.
that you have options, you know, you're still going to be buying products that are supplied by these companies, but go support that operator who doesn't have ties to these companies and is doing his own thing.
Absolutely.
Like,
Absolutely.
and I just think too, like, since the pool is so limited and Illinois just has such a history of corruption, I just think it's kind of it's like a little distasteful in my eyes to be like a former Illinois politician who clearly has like connections getting these licenses and and
Right.
then you're going to like justify it sure by saying you hired people from certain areas or people that were arrested for cannabis. It's like okay, great, but they're never going to be in an ownership position because the pool is limited. And are you out there campaigning to increase the number of licenses so these employees who have these cannabis arrests in their past, when they have experience, can go start their own?
Right. I was just pulling up you brought up transparency and how we're taking them at their word for it. We talked about it in the episode and I won't, since we've already talked about this, I won't go too far into it, but it's funny how it started with, well, the idea was to keep this not secret in the sense of lack of transparency, but to keep the process pure, right? And then
No,
it
they
turned,
also said it's for their safety.
that's what I was going to say. Then it turned into their safety and now it's just crickets. Um, and here's the thought that I
You
think
could
is
almost get those arguments, like the safety one, just with the
feds and
stories of
stuff.
all the robberies and stuff like no. I mean, I think they were saying it too about prosecution from like federal, weren't they?
Right. Right. That's what I
But also
was.
you could say it being like, oh, these people would be targets for robbery or extortion or something because they work in all cash. But like, I mean, that law just isn't in any other state. So like, why do we have that?
Well, in a point that David Lakeman, a regulator, made, I believe, on my show, uh, Shalene Title, a former regulator, made on my show, is that regulators often rely on the public for inquiries like this. And it's just like, okay, well, why don't you help me help you? And let's make this ownership thing. Why don't we have some disclosure here? And something that we'll talk about on the next episode is the fact that, and I mean, we talked about it on 232, but the concerns about lack of transparency came up before the passage of the law that legalized cannabis, or as we say, legalized cannabis. Senator Heather Staines and Representative Kelly Cassidy vowed to make ownership data completely accessible. And that's a quote. Despite that pledge, their bill passed with a confidentiality provision that the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation recently cited, and that this is from a May 3rd, 2020 article. So not recently, but in 2020. So it was recently cited in denying the Chicago Tribune's request for applications and ownership information about cannabis dispensaries. The state is applying similar secrecy to cultivation licenses. The Department of Ag responded to the Tribune's request for application and ownership information so heavily redacted that they yielded little information about who controls the business. The Tribune is fighting that ruling in an appeal to the Illinois Attorney General's office. I have no idea where this sits at this day, but I've read this
Yeah,
on
I
the
have
show
never
before.
heard the outcome of what that, or if there was a resolution to that lawsuit.
I'll have to follow up with some folks that I know there, and maybe we can, I don't know if they'll tell me, but I can at least ask, right? The worst thing I could get is nothing.
I also wonder too, like, does that kind of law like exist in any other industry? Like, are gambling licenses confidential?
So,
like casino licenses or whatever?
So here's the thing.
Is a liquor license confidential?
So Don Craven, an attorney from the Illinois Press Association, said enforcing secrecy invites trouble, right? Which is kind of a no-brainer. Now, Pam Altoff countered that, actually, this is interesting. She says, why shouldn't we know the names of those who are partaking of that opportunity? She says, people are very sensitive and not knowing what may occur if the information were available to anybody at a federal level. So that's Altoff. But to your point, sorry, I'm looking for it here. The lack of
what a weird perspective for a law enforcement friendly former state senator to have.
Right. To your point though, the lack of transparency means it's hard to determine whether questionable people are working their way into a state licensed business. The public needs to look no further than the gambling industry for examples of regulators falling short. In 2004, then Attorney General Lisa Madigan blocked the gaming board from awarding a casino license to Rosemont. Now, there's also mention of like a fucking, yeah. So I don't know, actually, to answer your question. Sorry. But his point, Don Craven from the Illinois Press Association, is like, this is just asking for trouble and you need to look no further than the gambling industry. So
it's just kind of wild. Like, it's a strange thing that like exists that no one talks about. And it's just interesting because when anyone does present themselves as an owner of a dispensary, it is kind of like, you want to be like, well, are there records I can see?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Because like really, like you don't know. There's
Mhm.
no way for you to independently verify who actually owns these things.
Absolutely. It's honestly pretty insane. It's more than pretty insane. It's just absolutely insane. So that all that content that we just covered, I'll try to throw a link. I'll throw a link for that in the podcast description, but you can look forward to that being in the next half of the Illinois cannabis history series, which we started. I mentioned it a few times. It's episode 232. Check it out. It's a long one, but it's a good one. And it includes the first version of this document that I have here. It's absolutely free to download, includes citations for everything that we talk about. And then, like I said, if you check out that episode, you can also learn how to trace the donations from some of these companies and interest groups to your elected officials. So just want to say thanks again for spending your night with me, Philip, or your evening. And yeah, any last thoughts before we go?
No, no thoughts. I'm just really stoned.
Well, good deal. I guess to put a cap on what we're saying, just to wrap it back around, you remember I was saying 2 former regulators were saying that, they really need the public's health. Again, I think it's like, well, maybe we should work to make this information transparent so that people like you and I, Philip, can nerd around and dig into it,
Well,
I mean, they should be digging into it too,
I
but I'm
just
just saying.
imagine like if they did, like if access was given and people could get those right, I just imagine there would be like so many stories.
Yeah, oh yeah, dude. Well, I mean,
Like, how could there
what we've
not be?
found, just what we've found, there seems to be ties between
Yeah,
basically all of the
there's like
companies.
weird ties between a lot of these companies. And like now there's a bunch more. Now there's like a lot more licenses out there. And I mean, who knows who's buying what? And it's
It's a
just wild.
it's a funny question. I just thought of well, I've been kind of thinking about the past few days, but I've been seeing people tweet certain state agencies and asking like, where do you stand on your Curaleaf investigation into the ownership ties, right? And it's like it's no wonder you've not heard a peep about that from Illinois, because good luck finding any of that fucking information. You know what I'm saying?
I mean,
Like,
that's such a crazy story.
right. Yeah. I mean, I'm not even going to pretend to totally understand that story, but it is pretty fucking crazy.
Well, just that a lot of their like money came from like Russia
But the
through.
way they hid it is what I do. And the way it was ultimately exposed, it's so crazy because it was like talk for a while. And then all of
Well,
a
it's
sudden
also
it's like,
funny
no,
too,
this is
because
real.
people like it is a crazy story, but also like, New York real estate has a lot of Russian money invested in it.
True.
Like, so Curaleaf is no different than like whatever Park Avenue or whatever is a ritzy street in Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
It's another way to think about it.
That is a good point. And I've heard that there's a lot of like Saudi money in the United States, So
There's a lot of all kinds of people's money in the United
true. True.
States.
I mean, yeah, there's money just floating around anywhere but in our direction, right? That's how it
It
feels
is it is
sometimes.
funny though, like when you pick up on a story like that, and it's like, oh, that's insane. And then if you think about it a little longer, it's like, well, but there's a lot of Russian money in like this and what, like
Mm-hmm.
they were invested in like sports teams. And I think I saw like Saudi Arabia bought like a huge stake in, was it Disney or like some company, some like big
WWE, I
American
know.
company.
I know they did WWE. Oh, and then the golf thing. Saudi Arabia,
Well, and
like,
they're like hugely invested in like esports or something like that. I think I've heard.
yeah, I don't know, but that sounds about right. I don't know. Yeah. Sounds like of course, something that, well, I don't want to say that esports started
I,
in
I would
America because it
I
probably
would
didn't,
doubt the
but
Saudi money was in cannabis though.
you think you do doubt
No,
that?
I don't think the Saudi money would be found in cannabis.
Okay. Yeah. Um, yeah, maybe perhaps also like going out on a limb here, just Chinese money. Like, don't they kill people for smoking weed in China? Or am I wrong?
I feel
There's
like
some companies, or it's like Singapore or
isn't there like
something.
a there's like a large like Chinese mob presence in the black market cannabis industry, I feel like.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's something I've heard or seen things about.
Yeah. And yeah, I'm trying to think of, maybe that was on Trafficked with Mariana Van Zeller, because that rings a bell. She talks about black
Possibly,
market
I did watch
cannabis.
that not long ago.
Yeah. So she talks about black market cannabis and how it works its way into some of the legal cannabis industries, which you just recently pointed out a situation with, what was it, Fuego in Michigan or something like that?
I think they might have like got their license pulled,
Interesting.
at least like where they were producing whatever, because they were like found to have unregulated cannabis like mixed in with their stuff.
Yeah. And I'm wondering like where that, yeah.
Well, and you have to think like, because that is such a crazy risk, like because you could like lose your ability to operate in whatever state you're in. Um, like with prices just getting so low over there. The market is so competitive. You just have to think like someone must be like pushed kind of to the edge to take that kind of risk, unless they're like just greedy. But
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you remember the shop we've both been to. Maybe we don't have to, 'cause I don't want to get them to be known about the shop that like talks shit about people, so we'll just be vague. But they were saying that, yeah, basically that's the case. What they've heard around the state is that, like, yeah, people are basically, because price compression is so real, they're like figuring out ways to cut corners, and it includes that, you know.
well, and that's when they got that new regulator, like that leads their
Bingo.
MRA, and he was talking about like enforcement. I never took that to mean like their gray market, uh, like gray market in the sense of like caregiver type
Mm-hmm.
stuff or events like that. Like I took it to mean like licensed operators who are cheating.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I remember talking to you about that because I was worried that he was talking about caregivers, but so far it seems that that's what they're focusing on. And if I recall, when Mike Fouché asked him about caregivers, he was like, he didn't indicate that that was an interest. It seemed like he more, like you said, it seemed more like he was talking about that, if I recall correctly. But
Well, and they will like there is that guy Michael Toohey. I think you were on a
yeah,
thing with him at one point. Like
yeah,
he got hassled by cops recently. So they are, you know, they'll still go after people who they, you know, want to say are operating outside the rules. People who might even be like caregivers if they have too many plants or whatnot. But
sure. Yeah. Well, anyways, we could do this all night, man. I'm gonna let you go. Folks, I hope you found value in this episode. And Philip, I'm looking forward to returning to this. I'm really proud of
yeah,
what we're
his
doing
history
here.
of cannabis 1.5.
I think it'll be 2 actually, because we did
Two.
1.5 with Marianne.
Oh, right, we did.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be
So
two.
yeah, so if you guys want to check it out, there are technically 2 episodes out. There's 1 and 1.5. I know episode 1 is episode 232. So if you want to hear the first version, the first episode of this, where we start all the way in 1978, believe it or not, um, we work all the way up to the first day of adult use sales. And so what's coming next and what we're working on now is going from the first day of adult use sales all the way up to today, which is, it's pretty tough. I'm almost to, I think, 2021, 2022 maybe. So yeah, I think I'm almost to 2021. So it takes a while, and I've got 50 pages, you know. It's
Well,
ridiculous.
it's probably those years 2020. I mean, starting in 2019, there's just so many more stories, you know, so
Yes.
many
Yeah.
more things you can pull from. So,
Right. Grown in. They fucking,
yeah,
they're amazing. So
a lot of good articles on there.
yeah, damn shame. It sounds like we won't be seeing anything else like that.
Yeah,
But
I don't see them too much. No. Haven't seen any updates.
yeah. Well, cool. All right. Well, folks, we'll see you next time. Take care.